Greetings to you all, and welcome to today's teaching. Over the years, Paul has been presented as many things. Some say he was a theologian. Some say he was a misogynist. Some say he was a church builder. Some say he was a radical. Some say he contradicted Jesus. But what if Paul was doing something much simpler? What if Paul was teaching people how to live together, how to love one another, how to disagree without destroying each other, how to raise children without crushing their spirit, how to lead without controlling, how to serve without being used, how to build households where people flourish rather than merely survive. When we remove the religious language for a moment and look at the principles, we discover that Paul's letters are some of the most practical writings ever produced. They are not merely about heaven. They are about what happens when heaven begins to appear within us. They are about what happens when Christ consciousness begins to shape how we relate to one another. Because if Christ is in all, then every relationship becomes sacred. Every marriage becomes sacred. Every child becomes sacred. Every human being becomes sacred. And suddenly, Paul's teachings stop looking like religious rules. They begin looking like principles of awakened living. So in this teaching, we are going to explore marriage, relationships, money, success, failure, parenting, respect, honor, conflict, forgiveness, humility, and love through the eyes of Paul. Not through modern social media. Not through red pill ideology. Not through feminist ideology. Not through religious dogma, but through the lens of Christ in all. Now, before anyone starts panicking and wondering whether this is going to be one of those relationship teachings where we spend 3 hours arguing about who is supposed to submit to who, don't worry, we are going deeper than that. Because if Jesus said the kingdom of God is within you, and Paul says Christ in you, the hope of glory, then Paul's teachings are not merely about external behavior. They are about what happens when awakened consciousness begins shaping how we relate to one another. And perhaps one of the biggest relationship mysteries of our time is this. Why does the woman sometimes choose the man with less money? Now, before anyone gets upset, I'm not saying money doesn't matter. Financial stability matters. Responsibility matters. Work ethic matters. Growth matters. But if you've lived long enough, you've probably seen situations where everyone expected the woman to choose one man, and she chose somebody completely different. The internet becomes confused. The friends become confused. The family becomes confused. Sometimes, even the woman becomes confused. Because on paper, the decision makes no sense. But human beings do not fall in love with spreadsheets. Human beings respond to how people make them feel. And that's what we are going to talk about today. Let's start with this scenario. Imagine two men. The first man arrives in a luxury vehicle. His watch costs more than some people's monthly rent. His shoes have their own insurance policy. He sits down and spends 30 minutes explaining how successful he is. The second man arrives in a vehicle that occasionally makes sounds that nobody can identify. When he starts the engine, even the car seems surprised that it started. But during the conversation, he listens. He pays attention. He remembers details. He asks questions. He notices things. The first man says, "I can buy you anything you want." The second man says, "How are you really doing?" The first man says, "I own multiple properties." The second man says, "You seemed stressed last week. Is everything okay?" The first man says, "I can take you anywhere in the world." The second man says, "You matter." And suddenly, the woman chooses the second man. Now the first man is confused. His friends are confused. The internet is confused. He goes home, opens YouTube, then types, "Why do women choose broke men?" And after watching 6 hours of videos, he's even more confused than before. What most people miss: the issue was never the money. The issue was connection. The issue was value. The issue was honor. The issue was respect. The issue was emotional safety. Because while money can provide comfort, comfort and connection are not the same thing. Many people assume women only care about resources. Some do. Just as some men only care about appearances. But mature relationships are built on something much deeper. People want to feel seen, want to feel valued, want to feel understood, want to feel safe. Now, let's talk about generosity. This is where many people misunderstand generosity. Imagine a man buys a $5,000 handbag. He hands it over and says, "I hope this stops all your complaining." The gift immediately loses value. Not because of the handbag, because of the spirit behind it. Now imagine another man buys a cup of coffee. Nothing extravagant, nothing impressive. But he remembered exactly how she likes it. The amount spent was small. The thoughtfulness was huge. And many people cannot understand why she keeps smiling about that coffee 3 days later. Because one person gave money, the other person gave attention. Paul's hidden wisdom. Paul says, "Though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor and have not love, it profited me nothing." Notice what Paul is saying. You can give and still miss the point. You can spend and still miss the point. You can provide and still miss the point. Because love is not measured by the size of the gift. Love is measured by the spirit behind it, the heart behind it, the intention behind it. The problem with modern thinking. One of the things social media has done is convince people that relationships are transactions. Many men have been taught, if I make enough money, women will love me. Many women have been taught, if I find someone rich, I'll be happy. But life keeps exposing the weakness of both ideas. Because there are lonely rich people. There are miserable rich people. There are wealthy couples who cannot stand each other. And there are ordinary couples with very little who genuinely enjoy being together. Why? Because relationships are built on character, not merely resources. The funny reality. Sometimes, the woman isn't asking for a private jet. She's asking for basic kindness. She's not asking for diamonds. She's asking to be heard. She's not asking for luxury. She's asking for respect. Meanwhile, some men are trying to solve emotional problems with financial solutions. If Christ is in all, then every person carries value. Not because of what they own, not because of their income, not because of their social status, not because of their job title, but because of the life within them. This changes how we see people. We stop evaluating people based solely on what they can provide and begin valuing who they actually are. The awakened person begins asking, who is this person? What kind of heart do they have? How do they treat others? How do they handle difficulty? How do they respond when nobody is watching? Because those things determine the quality of a relationship far more than a bank account ever will. Now let's be balanced here. This teaching is not saying money doesn't matter. Financial responsibility matters. Work ethic matters. Growth matters. A healthy relationship requires maturity. What I'm saying is that money alone cannot replace character. Money cannot replace kindness. Money cannot replace humility. Money cannot replace integrity. Money cannot replace genuine love. And eventually, every relationship reaches the point where character becomes more important than resources. This is why Paul keeps returning to love. Not power, not status, not control, but love. Because love sees people. Love listens. Love honors. Love values. Love respects. And perhaps the reason some people keep losing relationships they thought money could secure is because human beings were never designed to be purchased. They were designed to be cherished. Paul's teachings are not about domination. They are not about hierarchy. They are not about control. They are about creating relationships where people flourish. And it all begins with one simple question. If Christ is in all, how should we treat one another? Let's look at mutual submission. Let's look at one of the most misunderstood relationship teachings Paul ever wrote. In fact, it is so misunderstood that most people skip the verse entirely and jump straight to the next one. And once they skip it, the entire conversation becomes distorted. The verse is simple. Submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of God. Notice something. Paul does not start by talking about wives. He does not start by talking about husbands. He does not start by talking about authority. He does not start by talking about leadership. He starts with everyone, mutual submission, one to another. And if we are honest, This is probably the verse nobody wants to talk about because everybody likes being respected. Not everybody likes respecting others. Everybody likes being heard. Not everybody likes listening. Everybody wants grace. Not everybody wants to give grace. Everybody wants understanding. Not everybody wants to understand. Imagine a house where everybody wants to be the boss. The husband wants final say on everything. The wife wants final say on everything. The children want final say on everything. Nobody is listening. Everybody is speaking. Nobody is understanding. Everybody is defending. At this point, the family isn't a household. Everybody wants power. Nobody wants responsibility. Everybody wants to be understood. Nobody wants to understand. And then everyone wonders why there is tension. What submission actually means. For many people, the word submission immediately creates discomfort because they hear control, domination, loss of identity, loss of voice, loss of freedom. But let's think about what Paul is actually describing. Mutual submission is not you become less valuable than me. Mutual submission is I value you enough to consider your needs. It is humility in action. It is choosing not to make everything about yourself. It's recognizing that other people matter too. Their feelings matter. Their perspective matters. Their needs matter. Their humanity matters. How can Paul say Christ in you and then turn around and preach domination? Impossible. Impossible. That's why he starts with submitting yourself one to another in the fear of God. Because if Christ is in me and Christ is in you, then we respect one another. I can't look down on you. You can't look down on me either. It's impossible. I value the life in you. You value the life in me. That is mutual submission, not domination. Imagine a husband saying, "Why doesn't my wife listen to me?" Then his wife starts talking. 3 seconds later, no, that's not what happened. 5 seconds later, actually, let me explain. 10 seconds later, you are not understanding. Meanwhile, she hasn't finished her first sentence. Sir, you don't have a listening problem. You have a waiting for your turn to talk problem. Those are not the same thing. Now let's balance it. A wife says, "My husband never opens up emotionally." Then every time he tries to express something vulnerable, she responds with, "That's ridiculous. You are being dramatic. You shouldn't feel that way." Eventually, he stops sharing. Not because he has no feelings, because he doesn't feel safe sharing them. People flourish where they feel safe. People withdraw where they feel judged. Paul's deeper principle. Paul constantly returns to humility. Why? Because humility makes relationships possible. Pride says, "My perspective is the only perspective." Humility says, "Help me understand." Pride says, "I must win." Humility says, "Let's find a solution." Pride says, "I refuse to apologize." Humility says, "I was wrong." And let's be honest, three of the most difficult words in the English language are "I was wrong." Some people would rather write a 20-page essay explaining why they were technically correct than simply say, "You know what? I messed up. I was wrong." One of the biggest problems in modern relationships is that people often approach marriage as a power struggle. Who is in charge? Who gets the final word? Who has more authority? Who contributes more? Who earns more? Who sacrifices more? Everybody is keeping score. But healthy relationships are not competitions. They are partnerships. The goal is not to defeat your spouse. The goal is to build a life together. Imagine two people rowing a boat. One person rows east, the other rows west. Then they argue about why the boat isn't moving. That is how many relationships operate. The issue isn't effort. The issue is alignment. Mutual submission in everyday life. The beautiful thing about Paul's teaching is that it applies beyond marriage. Friendships, families, workplaces, communities. Imagine if co-workers practice mutual submission. Instead of "How do I get credit?" the question becomes, "How do we succeed together?" Imagine if family members practice mutual submission. Instead of "How do I win this argument?" the question becomes, "How do we preserve this relationship?" Imagine if leaders practice mutual submission. Instead of "How do I maintain power?" the question becomes, "How do I serve the people entrusted to me?" Everything changes. Let's look at Jesus as the example. Jesus washed feet. He consistently demonstrated service. Think about that. The one everyone wanted to elevate chose service. Modern culture often says, if you are important, people should serve you. Jesus demonstrates, if you are mature, you will learn to serve others. That doesn't mean becoming a doormat. It means understanding that true strength doesn't require domination. The household Paul envisioned. Imagine a household where everyone practiced this principle. The husband asks, how can I better support my wife? The wife asks, how can I better support my husband? The parents ask, how can we guide our children without crushing their spirit? The children learn, how can I honor those who care for me? Would there still be disagreements? Absolutely. Would there still be misunderstandings? Of course. But the atmosphere would be different. Because now we know Christ is in all. The source lives in all. So we honor each other. Everyone would be operating from honor instead of ego. If Christ is in all, then every interaction becomes sacred. How do I speak to my spouse? How do I respond when I'm frustrated? How do I disagree respectfully? How do I handle conflict? Because the moment we recognize value in one another, domination begins losing its appeal. We stop asking, how do I get my way? And begin asking, how do we flourish together? That is the spirit behind mutual submission. Not weakness. Not surrendering your identity. Not losing your voice, but choosing humility over ego. Love over control. Understanding over domination. Perhaps the reason this verse is so often ignored is because it challenges everyone equally. It doesn't allow husbands to point at wives. It doesn't allow wives to point at husbands. It doesn't allow parents to point at children. It doesn't allow children to point at parents. It points at all of us and ask, are you willing to value others as much as you value yourself? Because when mutual submission becomes mutual honor, and mutual honor becomes mutual love, relationships stop becoming battlefields. They begin becoming places where people grow. And that was Paul's vision all along. Not a house built on power, but a house built on humility. And humility is far stronger than most people realize. Now let's explore one of the biggest myths of our generation: the myth of the alpha male. Something that has become extremely popular in modern culture. Now, before anyone gets nervous, we are not here to attack men. In fact, we are going to do the exact opposite. We are going to recover something many men have lost: a healthier understanding of strength. Because somewhere along the way, many people started confusing strength with domination, confidence with arrogance, leadership with control, masculinity with intimidation. And the result has been a lot of broken relationships, lonely people, and very confused men trying to figure out why none of their relationships are working. If social media is to be believed, the alpha male is a man who never apologizes, never listens, never shows vulnerability, never admits fault, always dominates, always controls, always wins. Apparently, his hobbies include arguing online, explaining why everyone else is weak, and reminding strangers that he is an alpha every 12 minutes, just in case somebody forgot. The funny part: have you ever noticed something? The people who are genuinely confident rarely tell you they are confident. The people who are genuinely wealthy rarely spend all day talking about money. The people who are genuinely intelligent rarely spend all day explaining how intelligent they are. Yet somehow, the internet has created a generation of people constantly announcing their greatness. Imagine walking into a room and introducing yourself like this: "Hello, everyone. Before we begin, I'd like you all to know that I'm extremely humble." The statement defeats itself. Paul's definition of strength is radically different. Paul speaks about patience, self-control, gentleness, kindness, long-suffering, and humility. Now let's be honest. Most people don't associate those words with strength. They associate them with weakness. But think about it. Which requires more strength? Punching a wall when you are angry, or controlling your temper? Which requires more strength? Insulting someone who insulted you, or responding with wisdom? Which requires more strength? Forcing people to obey, or earning their trust? The answer is obvious. Self-mastery is harder than controlling others. One of the greatest misconceptions in relationships is this: if I can control people, they'll respect me. But that's not true. They may fear you. They may obey you. They may tolerate you. But respect is different. Respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. A man who constantly reminds everyone that he is in charge is often revealing insecurity rather than confidence. Because secure people do not need constant validation. Secure people do not need constant dominance. Secure people are comfortable enough to let others shine. Jesus completely ruins modern alpha theory. If modern social media had existed in the first century, many influencers would have been confused by Jesus. Imagine them watching him. They'll say, "Wait a minute. Why are you washing people's feet?" That's low status behavior. Then Jesus will say, "The greatest among you shall be your servant." Now, the entire alpha male podcast industry is having a crisis because Jesus consistently demonstrates that true leadership serves, not because it is weak, but because it is strong enough not to need constant recognition. Let's make this practical. A husband comes home and says, "I am the king of this house." Okay, wonderful. Let's continue. Do you help your wife? Do you listen? Do you encourage your children? Do you contribute emotionally? Do you show gratitude? Do you create peace? Or is everybody stressed when you walk into the room? Because if everybody relaxes when you leave and tenses up when you arrive, you are not leading. You are managing through fear, and fear is not leadership. What women actually respect. Many men have been taught women only respect power. Not exactly. Women often respect competence, integrity, consistency, emotional maturity, discipline, reliability. A man who keeps his word. A man who takes responsibility. A man who remains calm during difficulty. A man who treats others with dignity. A man who doesn't need to announce his value because his actions reveal it. That is attractive. Not because it is flashy, but because it is trustworthy. The strongest man in the room is often not the loudest. He's usually the calmest, the most secure, the least threatened, the least interested in proving himself. He doesn't need to dominate every conversation. He doesn't need to win every argument. He doesn't need to be the center of attention. He knows who he is. And because he knows who he is, He allows other people to be who they are. That is strength. This applies to parenting too. Some fathers think leadership means fear. The child obeys because they are terrified. The father calls it respect. Years later, the child moves out and never calls. Then the father becomes confused because fear can create obedience, but it rarely creates connection. A wise father leads through consistency, example, patience, and guidance. His children respect him, not because they are afraid, but because they trust him. The same principle applies at work. Everyone has had two types of managers. The first manager, because I said so. The second manager, let's solve this together. One gets compliance, the other gets loyalty. And loyalty is always more powerful. Paul understood something many people miss. The person who cannot control himself will eventually try to control everyone else. The person who has mastered himself has no need to dominate others. That is why Paul constantly talks about self-control. Because the real battle is not against other people. The real battle is within. Can I control my temper? Can I control my pride? Can I control my ego? Can I control my need to always be right? That is where true strength is revealed. If Christ is in all, then leadership changes completely. The question is no longer, how do I get people beneath me? The question becomes, how do I help people flourish? How do I help my spouse flourish? How do I help my children flourish? How do I help my friends flourish? How do I help my community flourish? Because awakened leadership is not about elevating yourself above others. It is about helping others rise. The greatest misunderstanding of masculinity is the belief that strength and gentleness are opposites. They are not. Anyone can lose control. Anyone can become aggressive. Anyone can dominate. But it takes tremendous strength to remain humble when you have power, to remain kind when you have authority, to remain patient when you are frustrated, to remain gentle when you could be harsh. And that is why Paul keeps pointing us back to humility, self-control, and love. Because the strongest man is not the one who controls everyone around him. The strongest man is the one who has learned to master himself. And when a man masters himself, He no longer needs domination to prove his strength. Now, let's look at the best friend of alpha male. They go together. The problem with the high value man conversation online. Wherever you find alpha male theory, you will definitely find high value man. It often reduces human worth to income, status, followers, cars, watches, and external achievements. But if that's true, then what happens when someone loses their job? What happens when a business fails? What happens when a wealthy person becomes poor? Did their value disappear? Of course not. Most of the internet's definition of a high value man sounds suspiciously like a tax return, income, assets, status, followers, luxury cars, luxury watches, expensive vacations. And while there's nothing wrong with success, one important question rarely gets asked. What exactly makes a human being valuable? Because if money alone determines value, then we are in trouble. The funny reality. Imagine introducing yourself like this. Hello, my name is John. My personality is 6 figures. That's essentially what some of these conversations sound like. You ask about character. They show you a bank account. You ask about integrity. They show you a car. You ask about kindness. They show you a watch. Those things may demonstrate success. They do not automatically demonstrate value. The dangerous question. If a man making $500,000 is high value, what is the man making $50,000? Low value? If a millionaire is high value, then what is the school teacher? What is the nurse? What is the firefighter? What is the construction worker? What is the stay-at-home parent? What is the janitor? What is the caregiver? What is the retired grandmother helping raise grandchildren? Do we really want to call human beings low value? Notice how quickly the idea begins falling apart. High earner is not high value. A high earner is someone who earns a lot of money. That's all it means. Nothing more, nothing less. It says absolutely nothing about integrity, honesty, kindness, humility, generosity, emotional maturity, faithfulness, compassion, and character. A person can earn millions and still be arrogant, still be abusive, still be selfish, still be dishonest, still be impossible to live with. Money doesn't automatically improve character. It often reveals character. The truly high value man. Let's define value differently. A high value man keeps his word, treats people with dignity, honors his commitments, respects women, protects without controlling, leads without dominating, serves without boasting, provides where he can, admits when he's wrong, continues learning, continues growing, remains humble despite success. Now we are talking about value because these qualities remain even if the money disappears. Now let's look at the truly high value woman. The same principle applies to women. A high value woman isn't valuable because of beauty, status, income, or social media attention. A high value woman demonstrates integrity, kindness, wisdom, emotional maturity, generosity, humility, discernment, respect, and accountability. These qualities create value because they contribute to flourishing relationships and communities. Here's a simple test. Imagine two men retire tomorrow. The first built his identity entirely around money. The second built his identity around character. Who remains valuable? Both. Both. Christ is in all. Because value was never the money. The money was simply one expression of their activity. Human worth exists independently of income. What Paul valued. Notice what Paul consistently praises. Not wealth, not status, not influence, not luxury. Paul continually praises love, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control, humility, and generosity. What we might call the qualities of awakened consciousness, the fruit of the Spirit, the qualities that make communities healthier, that make relationships flourish, and that make life better for everyone around us. The alpha male problem. One reason so many people become confused is because they mistake dominance for value. The loudest man in the room isn't always the wisest. The richest man in the room isn't always the happiest. The most feared man in the room isn't always the most respected. Real value often appears much quieter. It appears in consistency, character, integrity, service, and humility. Imagine a household where everyone understands this principle. Children learn that their worth is not determined by income. Women learn that their worth is not determined by appearance. Men learn that their worth is not determined by status. People still pursue success. People still work hard. People still build businesses. But they never confuse achievement with value. Can you imagine how much insecurity would disappear? If Christ is in all, then every human being carries inherent value, not earned value, not purchased value, not status-based value, value that exists because of their very being. This doesn't mean all behavior is equal. It means human worth is not measured by external success. It is recognized as something deeper, something intrinsic. One of the greatest mistakes modern culture has made is confusing net worth with human worth. One can increase, one never changes. A bank account can rise and fall. A business can succeed or fail. A career can begin and end. But character remains. Integrity remains. Humility remains. Love remains. Generosity remains. And that is why Paul continually points us toward the qualities of the Spirit rather than the symbols of status. Because a truly high-value person is not measured by what they possess. A truly high-value person is measured by what they become. And those are two very different things. Now let's explore something many people overlook. Why respect matters to men. The silent wound few people talk about. Let's be clear here. This is not a teaching about men being superior. It is not a teaching about women being inferior. It is not a teaching about one gender having more value than another. If Christ is in all, then everyone carries value. Everyone deserves dignity. Everyone deserves respect. But men and women often experience emotional wounds differently. And one of the deepest wounds many men carry is the feeling that they are valued only for what they can provide. Imagine a man loses his job. Life happens. Companies downsize. Businesses fail. The economy changes. Unexpected things happen. Now imagine every morning starts like this. The woman talking to him. So what's the plan today? By itself, that's not a problem. But then, she continues, must be nice sitting at home. Then my friend's husband will never allow this. Then I guess I'm the man of the house now. At first, he laughs. Then he smiles less. Then he talks less. Then he withdraws. Then everyone wonders what happened. What happened is that his spirit got tired. What many men never say. Many men grow up hearing, be strong. Men don't cry. Figure it out. Handle it. Man up. So they become very good at carrying burdens silently. What they often need is not someone to solve every problem. What they need is someone who believes in them. Someone who says, we are going to get through this. I know this is hard, but I still respect you. I still value you. I still honor you. Those words can be life-changing. Now let's balance the conversation. Respect does not mean tolerating bad behavior. It does not mean accepting laziness. It does not mean staying silent when there are problems. Respect does not mean enabling irresponsibility. A man who refuses to work, refuses to grow, refuses responsibility, and expects everyone else to carry him is not demonstrating maturity. That is not what we are talking about. We are talking about good people who are struggling, good people who are growing, good people who are trying, good people who occasionally fail, because all human beings fail sometimes. One thing Paul constantly does is encourage people. Read his letters, his epistles. Again and again, he builds people up. He reminds them who they are. He strengthens them. Paul understood something important. People often rise toward encouragement and shrink under constant criticism. Imagine a husband comes home tired. Instead of "what took you so long?" his wife says, "Thank you for everything you are doing for this family." Now imagine the wife has had a difficult week. Instead of "what do you do all day?" the husband says, "I appreciate everything you do." Now imagine the children hear both parents speaking this way. The children start doing the same thing. The atmosphere begins changing. Gratitude becomes normal. Encouragement becomes normal. Appreciation becomes normal. Can you imagine such a household? Most people don't realize how powerful appreciation is until they stop receiving it. Many people think relationships are destroyed because somebody forgot an anniversary. Sometimes, relationships are damaged by something much smaller. The absence of appreciation, the absence of acknowledgement, the absence of gratitude. A man fixes something around the house. Nobody notices. He works overtime. Nobody notices. He sacrifices. Nobody notices. Eventually, he starts feeling invisible. The same thing happens to women. The same thing happens to children. Human beings need to know that their efforts matter. Respect is not fear. Many people confuse the two. Fear says, I better do this or else. Respect says, I genuinely value you. Fear creates distance. Respect creates connection. Fear creates compliance. Respect creates loyalty. Fear may control behavior temporarily. Respect transforms relationships permanently. Peter says, giving honor unto the wife. Notice the word honor. Not tolerate. Not endure. Honor. But the principle works both ways. Because honor is the recognition of value. To honor someone is to acknowledge their humanity, their contribution, their worth, their dignity. And households flourish when honor becomes normal. Because when I understand that Christ is in all, when I understand that the source lives in us, honor becomes normal. It becomes impossible for me to disrespect you, for me to dishonor you, for me to look down on you. Impossible. One reason many men become emotionally distant is because they stop feeling valued. Again, this does not justify bad behavior. It does not justify cheating. It does not justify withdrawal. It simply explains something many people overlook. A person who feels constantly criticized often begins protecting themselves emotionally. Not because they don't care, because they are hurting. And hurting people often become silent. Paul's vision was never a household where one person is constantly celebrated while another person is constantly criticized. His vision was mutual encouragement, mutual care, mutual honor, mutual generosity, mutual love, a place where people help one another flourish. Imagine if every member of a household asked one question every day. How can I encourage someone today? Not what can I get? Not who appreciates me? But how can I make someone's day better? Can you imagine what will happen? The atmosphere will change. the relationships will change. The household will change. Because encouragement is contagious. So is kindness. So is generosity. So is gratitude. Imagine a household where generosity has become normal. The husband is coming home from work. He passes by a store. He sees ice cream. He thinks the kids will probably enjoy this. So he buys some. Not because he's trying to impress anyone, just because he thought about them. The wife is returning from work. She stops somewhere, sees a favorite snack her husband likes. Maybe a drink. Maybe a slice of pizza. Maybe something small. She smiles and says, he'll probably enjoy this. Again, not because she has to, because she wants to. A son gets his first paycheck. On his way home, he buys something for the family. Nothing expensive. Maybe it's a pizza. Maybe drinks. Maybe desserts. But the family smiles because everyone understands the spirit behind it. Now imagine this becoming normal. Nobody is keeping score. Nobody is saying, well, I bought something last week, so now it's your turn. Everybody is simply looking for opportunities to bless one another. Imagine such a house. People share meals together. Sometimes they go out together. Sometimes they stay home and laugh together. Sometimes they take trips together. Sometimes they simply sit in the living room talking. There is generosity. There is gratitude. There is appreciation. There is thoughtfulness. Can you imagine what that does to the atmosphere? People actually looking forward to coming home. The house becomes a place of refreshment rather than stress. The family becomes a source of strength rather than exhaustion. And the beautiful thing is that none of this requires millions of dollars. Most of these things cost very little because the true value is not in the item. The value is in the thought, in the consideration, in saying, I was thinking about you. That is one of the purest expressions of love. Not the price tag, but the spirit behind it. Because love is rarely built through one giant gesture. Love is usually built through thousands of small acts of generosity, repeated over time. And before long, the household becomes a living example of what Paul was describing when he spoke of kindness, love, mutual care, and preferring one another. Not a house where everyone asks, what can I get? But a house where everyone asks, how can I bless someone today? One of the greatest gifts we can give another human being is to make them feel seen. to make them feel appreciated, to make them feel valued, not because of what they produce, not because of what they earn, not because of what they provide, but because they are human, because they matter, because Christ is in all. And if Christ is in all, then every person deserves to be treated with dignity. Every spouse, every child, every parent, every human being. And that is why Paul spent so much time encouraging people. Because encouragement breathes life into others. And when people feel valued, they often become the best version of themselves. Now let's explore the other side of the conversation. Why emotional safety matters to women, and what many men never understand until it's too late. Many women experience emotional safety as one of the most important foundations of a relationship. And often, men don't realize how important it is until the relationship is already in trouble. At the beginning of a relationship, a man can listen for 4 hours straight. 4 hours. He's completely engaged. 2 years later, you say, "Honey, can we talk?" And suddenly, he becomes busy with other things. He's not interested in listening to you. What emotional safety actually means. Many people think emotional safety means you must agree with me all the time. No, that's not emotional safety. Emotional safety means I can express myself without fear of humiliation. I can share my concerns without being mocked. I can tell you how I feel without being dismissed. I can be vulnerable without it being used against me later. That is emotional safety. And when it is absent, relationships slowly begin deteriorating. The dismissal problem. Imagine a woman says, "Something has been bothering me." And the response is, "You are overthinking," or "You are too sensitive," or "You are too emotional," or "You are making a big deal out of nothing." Now, the issue isn't whether her concern is ultimately right or wrong. The issue is that she feels unheard. And people who feel unheard eventually stop talking. Not because the problem disappeared, because hope disappeared. One of the biggest mistakes many men make is assuming that because a woman stopped complaining, everything is fine. Sometimes she's at peace. Sometimes she's exhausted. Those are not the same thing. Sometimes people stop speaking because they no longer believe they are being heard. And by the time many men realize something is wrong, The emotional distance has already been growing for months or years. Imagine two houses. In one house, every concern becomes an argument. Every disagreement becomes a fight. Every mistake becomes an attack. Everyone is defensive. Nobody feels safe. Now imagine another house. People can speak honestly, disagree respectfully, apologize, listen, explain themselves without fear. Which house would you rather live in? The answer is obvious. One house creates tension, the other creates trust. The problem-solving trap. This is one of the funniest differences between many men and women. A woman says, "I've had a really difficult day." A man immediately responds, "Here is the solution. This and that and that and that." Meanwhile, she is thinking, "I didn't ask for a project manager. I wanted a listener." Now, to be fair, men often solve problems because they care. They genuinely want to help. But sometimes, the person doesn't need a solution first. Sometimes they need understanding first. One thing Paul constantly emphasizes is gentleness. Not weakness, gentleness. There is a difference. Weakness lacks strength. Gentleness possesses strength, but chooses wisdom. A gentle person knows how to correct without humiliating, how to disagree without attacking, how to lead without controlling, how to speak truth without causing unnecessary harm. That kind of person creates emotional safety. The little things matter. Many men think emotional safety is created through one grand gesture. Usually it isn't. It's built through small moments. Listening, checking in, paying attention, remembering details, showing concern, being present. The same way love is built through thousands of small acts. Emotional safety is built through thousands of small interactions. Imagine a household where everyone feels safe speaking. The wife feels safe expressing concerns. The husband feels safe expressing fears. The children feel safe asking questions. Nobody is mocked. Nobody is ridiculed. Nobody is constantly interrupted. People listen. People care. People respect one another. Can you imagine what that does to a family? Problems still happen. Bills still exist. Life still gets difficult. But people face those challenges together rather than against each other. Let's make this practical. Imagine a family goes out for dinner. Nobody is looking at their phones. Nobody is scrolling social media. Everyone is present. The children are talking. The parents are laughing. Stories are being shared. Memories are being created. Years later, nobody remembers the price of the meal. What they remember is the experience, the connection, the feeling. That is what people carry with them. Not the cost, the connection. What Peter understood. Peter tells husbands to dwell with their wives according to understanding. Think about that. Understanding, not domination, not intimidation, understanding. Because understanding creates connection. When people feel understood, trust grows. When trust grows, relationships deepen. When relationships deepen, love flourishes. If Christ is in all, then every person's experience matters. Every person's feelings matter. Every person's humanity matters. This doesn't mean we agree with everything. It means we care enough to listen. We care enough to understand. We care enough to see the person behind the words. And that changes everything. Many relationships don't collapse because love disappeared. Many relationships struggle because connection disappeared. The conversations became shorter. The listening became weaker. The kindness became rarer. The appreciation became less frequent. And eventually, two people who once felt deeply connected begin feeling like strangers. Not because of one catastrophic event, but because of thousands of small neglected moments. One of the greatest gifts we can offer another person is presence. To truly listen, to truly care, to truly understand. Not waiting for our turn to speak, not preparing our defense, not searching for a way to win, but genuinely listening. Because people feel safe where they feel understood. And people flourish where they feel safe. That is why Paul continually speaks about gentleness, patience, kindness, long-suffering, and love. Because these qualities create environments where people can grow, where people can heal, where people can become their authentic selves. And if Christ is in all, then creating that kind of space for one another becomes one of the highest expressions of love. Now let's talk about something that causes a tremendous amount of confusion in modern relationships. Dating. What is dating? Because many people are treating dating like a relationship. And many people are treating a relationship like marriage. And many people are treating marriage like ownership. So everybody is confused. Let's clear it up. Dating is not a relationship. Dating is a discovery process. Dating is information gathering. Data. Dating. Data. Information gathering. Dating is discernment. Dating is simply two people exploring whether they are compatible enough to build a life together. The easiest way to understand dating is through a job interview. Imagine applying for a job. You submit an application. You attend an interview. The company interviews multiple candidates. You interview multiple companies. Because interviewing is both ways. You are also interviewing the company, just like they're interviewing you. You'll see if there's alignment. Nobody is offended. Nobody says, how dare you apply elsewhere? Because everyone understands the purpose. The purpose is to determine alignment, determine compatibility, determine whether this is a good fit. Dating works similarly. You are not collecting people. You are collecting information, data. The funny reality. Imagine going on one coffee date. One coffee date. You barely know each other. You don't know their values. You don't know their habits. You don't know their goals. You don't know how they handle conflict. You don't know how they handle money. You don't know how they treat people. Yet some people immediately begin acting like they're already married due to chemistry. At this point, you are not dating. You are speed running emotional attachment. The double standard. Let's address something honestly. Some people say, if a woman is dating multiple men, she's not serious. Meanwhile, the same person is dating multiple women. Apparently, the rules only apply in one direction. That doesn't make sense. Because dating is not a relationship. Nobody is being intimate here. You are collecting data, not being intimate. That's what some people don't understand. Dating is not a relationship. If dating is truly the process of discernment, then both men and women are gathering information. Both are evaluating compatibility. Both are determining alignment. The standard should be consistent. The same way companies can interview many candidates, you can date multiple people. It's not about being intimate with anyone. You're collecting data. Companies don't call it cheating when they're interviewing multiple candidates, because nothing intimate is happening. Dating is not primarily about chemistry. Chemistry is easy. Compatibility is harder. Dating reveals values, character, consistency, communication, emotional maturity, work ethic, integrity, generosity, humility, and readiness. Those are the things that matter long term. Because attraction may begin a relationship, but character sustains it. The situationship trap. One reason many people get stuck in situationships is because they enter dating without clarity. One person wants marriage, the other wants entertainment. One person wants commitment, the other wants convenience. One person is preparing for the future, the other is simply passing time. The result is confusion. Months become years. Years become frustration because expectations were never aligned. Many people even start living together before they have answered the most important questions. Do we share values? Do we share goals? Do we share a vision for the future? Are we even moving in the same direction? But because of chemistry, they throw all this away. Now they are sharing rent, sharing furniture, sharing responsibilities, and still don't know whether they are actually compatible. The logistics advance faster than the discernment. You only date when you are ready. This may be unpopular, but dating makes the most sense when you are actually open to settling down when you are ready. Otherwise, you are simply collecting experiences and sometimes collecting unnecessary wounds. If you already know you are not ready for commitment, be honest. There's nothing wrong with that. What becomes problematic is pretending to seek commitment when you know you aren't available for it. Let people be where they are. One of the healthiest things people can learn is this. If someone isn't ready, let them be. Don't force it. Don't convince them. Don't pressure them. Don't turn yourself into a salesperson. If someone is not ready for commitment, believe them. If someone wants something different, respect it. The goal is not to persuade people into alignment. The goal is to find alignment naturally. Eventually, the discovery process reaches a conclusion. At some point, the interviews end. At some point, a decision is made. At some point, two people say, we have enough information. We share values. We trust each other. We are moving in the same direction. That is where commitment begins. Dating gathers data. Commitment follows discernment. If Christ is in all, then dating should be rooted in honesty, not manipulation, not games, not deception, not pretending to be someone you are not. The goal is not to win someone. The goal is to discover whether two people can genuinely flourish together. How many people have mistaken attention for compatibility? How many have mistaken attraction for readiness? How many have mistaken chemistry for character? How many have stayed in situationships because they never stopped to ask, are we actually moving toward the same future? Those questions matter. Let's look at some dating rules that may be costing you good people. Social media has become very creative. One video says, if it doesn't take you somewhere expensive, leave. Another says, if he doesn't spend a certain amount on the first date, he's not serious. Another says, if he doesn't pay for everything immediately, he can't provide. Now let's pause for a second. You barely know each other. This is not your husband. This is not your wife. This is not someone you've built a life with. This is someone you are getting to know. You are trying to discover, who are you? What kind of person are you? How do you think? What are your values? How do you treat people? What kind of character do you have? The purpose of dating is discovery, not extraction. Imagine a man and woman meet for the first time. Before he even sits down, she's already evaluating the restaurant, checking the menu, the price, the location, the lighting, the parking lot, the furniture. The poor man hasn't even introduced himself yet. At this point, she's not evaluating the man. She's evaluating the business establishment. Meanwhile, he's sitting there wondering, does she even like me? What if he's actually a good man? Here's the uncomfortable question. How many good men have been dismissed because they didn't follow somebody else's dating script? Maybe he's responsible. Maybe he's hardworking. Maybe he's kind. Maybe he's emotionally mature. Maybe he's honest. Maybe he has integrity. Maybe he will make an incredible husband. But he suggested a simple coffee date. Now, social media says coffee dates are low effort. So she rejects him. Years later, she is still searching for the qualities she already rejected. Not because the man was wrong, because the expectations were. The transaction problem. The moment people start viewing dating as a financial test, something interesting happens. The interaction begins feeling transactional. And transactions create expectations. Now the woman is thinking, if he doesn't pay, he's not serious. The man is also thinking, if I pay, what exactly am I getting in return? Notice how quickly connection disappears. Now neither person is discovering each other. They are negotiating terms and conditions. And that's dangerous because relationships built on transactions often remain transactional. Generosity versus obligation. Now let's be balanced. There is nothing wrong with a man paying for a date. Absolutely nothing. Many men enjoy doing that. Many men genuinely want to. The issue isn't the payment. The issue is expectation. There is a huge difference between I want to do something nice for you and you are required to do something nice for me. One comes from generosity. The other comes from obligation. Generosity creates warmth. Obligation creates pressure. Let kindness be voluntary. One of the healthiest things two people can do while dating is allow kindness to remain voluntary. If he wants to pay, wonderful. If she wants to contribute, wonderful. If they decide together, wonderful. The important thing is the spirit behind it. Because the healthiest relationships are not built on what can I get from you. They are built on who are you? And that question is infinitely more important than who paid for dinner. The deeper reflection. Perhaps one of the reasons so many people struggle in modern dating is because they are evaluating potential partners using criteria that have very little to do with long-term happiness. A restaurant cannot tell you if someone is faithful. A meal cannot tell you if someone is kind. A bill cannot tell you if someone is patient. A luxury date cannot tell you if someone has integrity. Character reveals those things. Time reveals those things. Life reveals those things. And perhaps that is why so many people have walked away from genuinely good people while chasing symbols that looked impressive but never translated into healthy relationships. The goal of dating is not to discover who can spend the most money. The goal is to discover who you are actually sharing your life with. One of the greatest misunderstandings in modern relationships is the belief that dating itself is the destination. It isn't. Dating is the bridge. The purpose of a bridge is to help you reach the other side. The purpose of dating is to help you determine whether two lives can be built together. And that requires honesty, discernment, patience, and wisdom. Because the goal is not simply finding someone, the goal is finding alignment. And when alignment exists, commitment becomes much easier because two people are no longer forcing something to work. They are choosing one another with clarity. And that is a far healthier foundation than confusion ever could be. Next, let's discuss something that affects almost every relationship on earth: money. Now, the moment people hear the word money, emotions immediately become involved. Some people get excited. Some people get nervous. Some people start calculating expenses. Some people suddenly remember bills they forgot existed. Money has a way of getting everyone's attention. But today, we are not talking about wealth. We are talking about freedom. Because one of the biggest questions in relationship is this: am I with you because I choose you? Or am I with you because I need you? And those are two very different relationships. The social media industry of relationships. Imagine a young woman opens social media. The first video says, find a rich man. The second says, never struggle with a man. The third says, if he can't fly you first class, leave. The fourth says, your money is your money. His money is our money. 3 hours later, she feels less like she's preparing for a relationship and more like she's preparing for a corporate acquisition. Meanwhile, a young man opens social media. The first video says, never trust women. The second says, keep control. The third says, make sure she needs you. The fourth says, money gives you power. Now, two wounded people meet. One is afraid of being used. The other is afraid of being controlled. And everyone is shocked when the relationship becomes stressful. One of the greatest gifts a person can give themselves is the ability to stand on their own feet. Not because they hate relationships, not because they don't want partnership, not because they don't appreciate support, but because freedom changes everything. A woman who can take care of herself can honestly say, I don't need you to survive. I choose you because I want to build a life with you. A man who can take care of himself can honestly say, I'm not looking for someone to rescue me. I'm looking for someone to grow with me. That creates a healthier foundation because neither person is entering the relationship from desperation. Now let's talk honestly. There is nothing wrong with wanting financial stability. There is nothing wrong with wanting a responsible partner. There is nothing wrong with wanting someone who is disciplined with money. Those are reasonable desires. The problem begins when money becomes the primary reason for the relationship. Because eventually, people start trading freedom for security. And that trade often becomes expensive. Much more expensive than they expected. Because freedom has value. The funny reality. Some people say, I want a wealthy partner. Then they find one. Now every purchase requires explanation. Every decision requires permission. Every expense becomes an interrogation. Suddenly they realize, wait a minute. I wanted financial stability. I didn't realize I was applying to become an employee. Money is wonderful. Control is not. Now let's balance the conversation. This does not mean ambition doesn't matter. It does not mean responsibility doesn't matter. It does not mean people should tolerate laziness. No. Growth matters. Work ethic matters. Discipline matters. Purpose matters. There is a difference between someone who is struggling while actively building a future and someone who refuses responsibility altogether. Those are not the same thing. Successful women and fear. One reason many successful women remain unmarried is not because they cannot find a partner. Often there is fear. Maybe they saw a woman support a man who later abandoned her. Maybe they experienced betrayal themselves. Maybe they watched someone build a man up only to be left behind when he became successful. So a belief forms. I can never be with a man who makes less than me. The money appears to be the issue, but often the wound is the real issue. The fear is the real issue. Men carry fear too. The funny thing is, men do the same thing. A man sees a successful woman. She has a great career. She's educated. She's accomplished. She's financially secure. And immediately, he starts rejecting himself. He hasn't even spoken to her yet. But the conversation in his head begins. She'll disrespect me. She'll treat me like a servant. She'll think she's better than me. Meanwhile, she's standing there wondering why he's acting strange. He's responding to a story, not the actual person. One of the greatest mistakes people make is turning personal experiences into universal truths. One man disappointed you. Now every man becomes suspicious. One woman hurt you. Now every woman becomes dangerous. One relationship failed. Now every future relationship looks doomed. But life doesn't work that way. There are arrogant men. There are humble men. There are selfish women. There are generous women. There are people who abuse power. There are people who use power to serve. Wisdom is learning to see individuals rather than stereotypes. One of the most destructive ideas modern culture has normalized is my money is my money. Your money is our money. That mindset creates division immediately. A household cannot thrive if everyone is operating from self-interest. Paul's vision is much closer to partnership. Not what can I take, but what can we build together? Not how much can I get, but how can we help one another flourish? Paul constantly talks about generosity, not entitlement, generosity. There is a huge difference. Entitlement says you owe me. Generosity says I want to share. Entitlement drains relationships. Generosity nourishes them. Entitlement keeps score. Generosity keeps giving. And households flourish when generosity becomes part of the culture. If Christ is in all, the relationships stop being transactions. People stop asking, what can I get from you? And start asking, how can I contribute? How can I help? How can I encourage? How can I support? How can I bless? Because love is not about extracting value. Love is about creating value. The healthiest relationships are not built on dependency. They are built on partnership. Two people who can stand independently, yet choose to work together. Not because they have to, but because they genuinely want to. Not because they fear being alone, but because they enjoy building a life together. That is a very different kind of love. Perhaps one of the greatest misunderstandings about relationships is the belief that money guarantees happiness. Money can solve many problems, but it cannot create character. It cannot create loyalty. It cannot create kindness. It cannot create humility. It cannot create love. Those things must already exist within the people involved. And that is why Paul continually points us back to generosity, humility, service, and love. Because the strongest relationships are not built on dependence. They are built on freedom. Two people choosing one another every day. Not because they need to, but because they want to. And there is something profoundly beautiful about that. Don't let fear talk you out of something beautiful. Pain is a terrible prophet. Pain makes terrible predictions. Pain often assumes the future will look exactly like the past. But life doesn't work that way. Just because someone betrayed you doesn't mean everyone will betray you. Just because someone lied doesn't mean everyone lies. Just because someone failed you doesn't mean everyone will fail you. Pain wants certainty. Love requires courage. Social media has made this problem worse because healthy relationships rarely go viral. Nobody uploads a video saying, "My husband respected me today." Nobody uploads, "My wife encouraged me today." Nobody uploads, "We had a disagreement and solved it peacefully." That doesn't generate millions of views, but conflict does. Drama does. Outrage does. So people begin consuming a steady diet of relationship horror stories. Eventually, they start believing those stories represent everyone. The funny reality: a woman meets a kind man. He's respectful, honest, hardworking, emotionally mature, and consistent. But he makes less money than she does. Immediately, fear starts talking. Remember what happened to your friend. Remember what happened to your aunt. Remember that story you saw on social media. And before she knows it, she has rejected a real human being because of a hypothetical future that hasn't happened. Now let's flip it. A man meets a successful woman. She's humble, kind, respectful, thoughtful, emotionally mature. But she has a better career than he does. Suddenly, fear starts talking. She's going to disrespect you. She's going to control you. She's going to embarrass you. The poor woman hasn't even ordered her coffee yet. And she's already been convicted in a trial she didn't know existed. What Paul understood: Paul repeatedly encourages believers not to be governed by fear. Why? Because fear distorts perception. Fear exaggerates danger. Fear assumes motives. Fear creates walls before there is even a threat. Fear makes us judge people before we know them. Fear keeps us from receiving things we've prayed for. Let's be honest. Many women have legitimate reasons for caution. Some have been lied to. Some have been cheated on. Some have been abandoned. Some have been manipulated. Those wounds are real. Those experiences matter. But eventually, healing requires a decision. Will I allow the wound to teach me wisdom? Or will I allow the wound to define my future? Because those are not the same thing. Wisdom learns, fear generalizes. The same is true for men. Some men have experienced disrespect. Some have been used. Some have been falsely accused. Some have been humiliated. Some have invested deeply, only to be hurt. Those wounds are real too. But eventually, the same question appears. Will the pain become a lesson, or will it become a prison? Parents do this too. A child makes a mistake. The parent gets hurt. Now, every future situation is treated as though the child cannot be trusted. Eventually, the child begins feeling like they are permanently on trial. Healthy parenting requires correction, but it also requires allowing people room to grow. The same principle applies in marriage, applies in friendships, applies in life. This is where things become interesting. Sometimes, what people call standards are actually fears. Now, let's be clear. Standards are healthy. Boundaries are healthy. Discernment is healthy. But occasionally, someone says, I just have standards. When what they really mean is, I'm terrified of being hurt again. And if we are honest, healing cannot begin until we recognize the difference. If Christ is in all, then every new person deserves to be seen for who they are, not who someone else was, not who your ex was, not who your friend's ex was, not who a stranger on social media was, who they are. Because every human being deserves the opportunity to reveal their character for themselves. Imagine how many beautiful friendships never happened because of fear. How many wonderful marriages never happened because of fear. How many meaningful relationships never began because fear got there first. Not because the opportunity wasn't real, but because pain was speaking louder than possibility. One of the saddest things in life is not being hurt. Being hurt is part of life. Every human being experiences disappointment. The tragedy is allowing an old wound to convince you that something beautiful is no longer possible. That is when fear wins. And fear is a terrible architect. It builds walls, not homes. Paul speaks repeatedly about faith, hope, and love. Notice what stands opposite them. Fear. Fear closes doors. Fear isolates. Fear assumes the worst. Fear expects betrayal. Love does not ignore wisdom. Love does not abandon discernment. Love simply refuses to let fear become the final authority. Because sometimes the very thing you've been praying for arrives in a package you weren't expecting. A kind person, a humble person, a respectful person, a generous person, a person who genuinely values you. And if all you can see is your fear, you may completely miss the gift standing right in front of you. So learn from the past, grow from the past, heal from the past, but don't build your future around the past. Because something beautiful may be waiting on the other side of your fear, and it will be a tragedy to miss it. Now let's talk about generosity. Paul constantly speaks about generosity, not because God needs money, not because generosity makes someone spiritually superior, because generosity changes people. Generosity trains the heart to think beyond itself. Selfishness asks, what can I get? Generosity asks, what can I give? Selfishness asks, what's in it for me? Generosity asks, how can I make someone else's day better? And households become healthier when generosity becomes normal. Human beings want to feel remembered. Human beings want to feel considered. Human beings want to feel valued. A small gift often communicates something much bigger than its price tag. When most people hear the word wealth, they think about money. But there are households with financial wealth and emotional poverty, beautiful homes, luxury vehicles, expensive furniture, but nobody enjoys being there. Then there are households with less money, but abundant connection, abundant kindness, abundant encouragement, abundant laughter, and people cannot wait to come home. One household is financially rich, the other is relationally rich, and relational wealth often outlasts financial wealth. Imagine a marriage where both people are constantly looking for ways to bless one another. The husband asks, how can I make her day easier? The wife asks, how can I encourage him today? Nobody is waiting for birthdays. Nobody is waiting for anniversaries. Nobody is waiting for special occasions. Kindness happens regularly. Not because there is a rule, because there is love. The same principle applies to parenting. Many parents provide food, provide shelter, provide clothing. Those things are important. But children also need generosity of attention. generosity of time, generosity of encouragement, generosity of patience. A child may forget a toy. A child rarely forgets how a parent made them feel. A child who grows into adulthood and occasionally thinks about their parents is practicing generosity too. A phone call, a visit, a meal, a thoughtful gesture. These things matter because generosity flows in every direction, not just downward, not just upward, everywhere. What generosity does? Generosity changes the atmosphere of a household. People become more appreciative, more grateful, more thoughtful, more connected, because generosity is contagious. When one person starts thinking about others, others begin doing the same thing. And before long, an entire household changes. If Christ is in all, then every act of kindness becomes sacred. Not because the act itself is large, but because it recognizes the value of another person. Every encouraging word, every thoughtful gesture, every act of service, every small kindness, each one says you matter. And that is one of the deepest expressions of love. Imagine a household where everyone wakes up asking, how can I bless someone today? Not what can I take? Not what am I owed? But how can I contribute? Can you imagine what that will do? The atmosphere will change. The relationships will change. The family will change. Because generosity has a way of multiplying. Many people spend their lives waiting for extraordinary opportunities to demonstrate love. Meanwhile, love is hiding in ordinary moments. A drink, a meal, a phone call, a conversation, a hug, a compliment, a word of encouragement, a thoughtful gesture. These small things seem insignificant, yet over time, they become the foundation of extraordinary relationships. That is why Paul continually speaks about kindness, generosity, service, and love. Because households are rarely destroyed by the absence of grand gestures. They are usually strengthened by the presence of countless small acts of kindness. And when generosity becomes a way of life, people stop merely living together. They begin flourishing together. Next, let's look at parenting without crushing the spirit of children. Most parents genuinely love their children. Most are doing the best they know how to do. Most sacrifice tremendously. Most want their children to succeed. So this is not about attacking parents. This is about exploring something Paul understood that many people overlook. Children are not property. They are not extensions of our ego. They are not trophies. They are not robots. They are not personal projects designed to fulfill dreams we never achieved. They are human beings, and human beings flourish under guidance, but they often struggle under control. Have you ever noticed how some parents say, I want my child to tell me everything? Then the child tells them something, and suddenly the conversation turns into an interrogation, a courtroom trial, a criminal investigation, or a 3-hour lecture. The child leaves thinking, I have learned something valuable today. Not amnesty, survival. Next time, they simply tell the parent what the parent wants to hear. And then years later, the parent says, my child never talks to me. The child is thinking, I tried that once. It was not a pleasant experience. Paul's remarkable advice. Paul says, parents, no, he said, fathers, provoke not your children to wrath. Think about that. Paul is not speaking to children. He's speaking to parents. And he's essentially saying, don't make life unnecessarily difficult for your children. Don't constantly humiliate them. Don't constantly discourage them. Don't constantly crush their spirit. Don't create an environment where resentment becomes normal, because resentment eventually becomes distance. The difference between correction and humiliation. This is one of the most important distinctions in parenting. Correction says, you made a mistake. Humiliation says, you are the mistake. Correction addresses behavior. Humiliation attacks identity. A wise parent corrects behavior while protecting dignity, because children need guidance, but they also need confidence. Imagine a child brings home a report card. They earn 5 A's and 1 B. The parent looks directly at the B immediately, without hesitation. What's this? The child is standing there wondering, did we not see the other 5 subjects? Some children grow up feeling like nothing is ever enough. Not because their parents hated them, because appreciation was rare and criticism was abundant. Eventually, some children stop trying, not because they are lazy, because they are exhausted. Imagine spending years believing, no matter what I do, it won't be enough. That belief becomes heavy, and many adults are still carrying it decades later. Some parents believe fear creates respect. And to be fair, fear does create something: compliance. Fear can make a child obey while you are watching. But what happens when you are not watching? What happens when the child becomes an adult? What happens when they are free to make their own decisions? The relationship often struggles because fear never created trust. It only created obedience. Now imagine something different. A parent corrects. A parent teaches. A parent sets boundaries. A parent enforces consequences. But the child still feels loved, still feels heard, still feels respected, still feels safe. Now discipline becomes a tool for growth rather than a weapon of control. And the child learns responsibility without losing confidence. Let's make this practical. Imagine a teenager says, I want to become an artist. The parent immediately says, you will never make money. Or that's a waste of time. Or choose something real. Now, maybe the parent is trying to help. Maybe they are concerned. But notice what happened. Their dream was crushed before it was explored. A wiser response might be, tell me more. What interests you about that? Let's explore how that could work. Guidance, not dismissal. The same thing happens when children make mistakes in relationships. Many parents forget they were once young too. The child comes for advice. Instead of guidance, they receive, I told you so. Now the child learns a dangerous lesson. Not my parents are wise, but my parents are unsafe when I make mistakes. And eventually, they stop coming for advice. Generosity is not just about money. Parents can be generous with patience, encouragement, attention, listening, and understanding. Imagine a parent who regularly says, I'm proud of you. Good job, buddy. I appreciate your effort. Thank you for helping. Those words cost nothing, yet they can shape a child's entire life. One of the hardest lessons for many parents is realizing your child is not you. They may have different interests, different talents, different dreams, different personalities, different strengths. Your role is not to create a clone of yourself. Your role is to help them become the healthiest version of themselves. If Christ is in all, then children carry the same divine value as adults. Not future value, present value. Not value they'll receive someday, value they possess right now. This changes everything. The child is no longer someone to control. The child becomes someone to nurture, someone to guide, someone to help flourish. Imagine a household where parents listen. Children feel safe speaking. Mistakes become learning opportunities. Successes are celebrated. Correction happens with dignity. Love remains consistent. Nobody is perfect, but everyone is growing. Can you imagine what kind of adults emerge from that environment? Confident adults, compassionate adults, secure adults, responsible adults, adults who both know how to lead and how to love. Many people spend years healing from childhood wounds, not because their parents were evil, because their parents were wounded too. They passed down what they received. The beautiful thing is that awareness allows us to break cycles. We can choose a different path. We can parent with more wisdom than we inherited. One of the greatest responsibilities a human being can receive is the care of a child. Not because children are fragile, but because they are impressionable. Our words become part of their inner voice. Our actions become their examples. Our treatment of them shapes how they eventually see themselves. And that is why Paul says, "Fathers, provoke not your children to wrath." Because children grow best where they are guided without being crushed, corrected without being humiliated, disciplined without being shamed, loved without conditions. If Christ is in all, then parenting becomes far more than managing behavior. It becomes helping another human being discover who they were created to become. And that is one of the most sacred responsibilities there is. Next, let's talk about why humility is one of the greatest powers a human being can possess. Humility is one of the most misunderstood virtues in the world. Many people hear humility and immediately think weakness, timidity, low self-esteem, being a doormat. But Paul never presents humility that way. In fact, Paul presents humility as one of the highest expressions of spiritual maturity. Because humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is becoming less obsessed with yourself. And those are two very different things. The funny reality: everybody wants a humble spouse. Nobody wants to be the humble spouse. Everybody wants a humble boss. Nobody wants to be the humble boss. Everybody wants humble children. Nobody wants to model humility first. It's like people wanting a garden while refusing to plant seeds. Everyone loves the result. Few appreciate the process. Humility is not weakness. Let's clear something up. Weakness says, "I have no power." Humility says, "I have power, but I don't need to use it to control people. Those are not the same thing. A person who lacks power has no choice. A humble person has a choice and still chooses kindness. That's strength. Imagine a husband and wife having a disagreement. The husband knows he's wrong. The wife knows he's wrong. The children know he's wrong. The neighbors know he's wrong. Even the dog knows he's wrong. But he refuses to admit it. Now the issue is no longer the original disagreement. The issue has become pride. Because pride will rather damage a relationship than admit a mistake. Humility says, you know what? I was wrong. 3 simple words. Yet some people treat them like they are trying to donate a kidney. Like something difficult. 3 simple words. Now let's balance the conversation. Women can do the same thing. Sometimes, the issue isn't that someone made a mistake. The issue is that nobody wants to surrender their position. Everyone is defending. Nobody is listening. Everyone is trying to win. Nobody is trying to understand. At that point, the relationship has become a competition. And relationships were never designed to be competitions. One reason humility is so powerful is because humble people keep growing. Arrogant people stop learning. Think about it. If I believe I already know everything, what motivation do I have to learn? None. Humility allows a person to say, maybe I don't know everything. Maybe I missed something. Maybe I can improve. And that mindset opens doors that pride keeps closed. This applies to parenting too. One of the most powerful moments in a child's life is when a parent says, I was wrong. I'm sorry. Imagine that. A parent apologizing. Not because the parent is weak, because the parent is mature. Children learn humility by observing humility. They learn honesty by observing honesty. They learn accountability by observing accountability. Many parents want respectful children. The question is, do the children regularly see respect modeled? The same principle applies at work. Everyone has experienced 2 kinds of leaders. The first leader, I know everything. Don't question me because I said so. The second leader, what do you think? Let's explore this. I might be wrong. One creates fear. The other creates growth. One protects their ego. The other develops people. And guess which one employees usually respect more? Social media and humility. One thing social media has done is make humility seem unpopular. Everyone is branding themselves. promoting themselves, announcing themselves, building personal empires. And there is nothing wrong with confidence. But confidence and arrogance are not the same thing. Confidence says, I know my value. Arrogance says, my value makes me better than you. Confidence is secure. Arrogance is insecure pretending to be secure. One of the most beautiful things to witness is a successful person who remains humble. A person with money who treats everyone with dignity. A person with influence who listens. A person with authority who serves. A person with knowledge who continues learning. Why is that so attractive? Because humility humanizes power. Without humility, power often becomes domination. With humility, power becomes service. Imagine a household where humility becomes normal. The husband apologizes when he's wrong. The wife apologizes when she's wrong. The parents apologize when they are wrong. The children learn to apologize when they are wrong. Nobody is obsessed with winning. People are focused on understanding. Focus on growth. Focus on preserving the relationship rather than protecting their ego. Can you imagine how much conflict will disappear? Not because people stopped making mistakes, because people stopped worshiping their pride. The hidden superpower. Humility does something pride cannot do. It opens doors. Humility opens hearts. It opens conversations. It opens opportunities. It opens relationships. Pride often closes all of them. This is why some people keep repeating the same mistakes. Not because they lack intelligence, because pride prevents learning. Humility allows transformation. If Christ is in all, then humility becomes natural. Because the moment I recognize value in others, I stop behaving as though I'm the center of the universe. I begin listening. I begin learning. I begin serving. I begin considering others. Not because I'm less valuable, because I recognize that they are valuable too. One of the greatest misconceptions in modern culture is the belief that arrogance is strength. It isn't. Arrogance is often insecurity, wearing expensive clothing. True strength is humility, the ability to listen, the ability to learn, the ability to apologize, the ability to serve, the ability to admit when you are wrong, the ability to value others without diminishing yourself. That takes tremendous strength. And that is why Paul continually returns to humility. Because humility is not weakness. It is strength under control. And strength under control is one of the most beautiful forms of power a human being can possess. Next, let's talk about something that quietly destroys marriages: friendships, families, workplaces, and even entire communities. Keeping score. Now, let's be honest. Most people don't think they are keeping score until they get upset. Then suddenly they remember everything. Not some things, everything. Events from 3 years ago, conversations from 7 years ago, things said during the previous administration. At that point, they are not having an argument. They are presenting historical evidence. Have you ever noticed how some people have memories that only activate during disagreements? Everything seems forgotten. Everything seems peaceful. Then an argument begins. Suddenly, actually, on June 14, 2022, at approximately 4:37 p.m., you said this and that. The other person is standing there wondering, how do you even remember that? At this point, the relationship isn't a relationship. It's an active investigation. The marriage scoreboard. Imagine a husband and wife. The husband says, I took out the trash. The wife says, I cooked dinner. The husband says, I worked all day. The wife says, I cleaned the house. The husband says, I paid the mortgage. The wife says, I took the children to school. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Eventually, nobody feels appreciated because both people are focused on proving their contribution rather than appreciating the contribution of the other. Sometimes, relationships slowly transform into accounting departments. Every favor is recorded. Every gift is tracked. Every sacrifice is documented. Every act of kindness requires repayment. At that point, people stop giving freely because nothing is free anymore. Everything comes with terms and conditions. Paul constantly points people toward generosity. Why? Because generosity and scorekeeping cannot comfortably exist together. Generosity says, I want to give. Scorekeeping says, I want credit. Generosity says, how can I help? Scorekeeping says, who is helping me? Generosity focuses on contribution. Scorekeeping focuses on comparison. And comparison is one of the quickest ways to poison a relationship. Parents do this too. A parent says, after everything I've done for you. Now let's be clear. Parents sacrifice tremendously. Children should appreciate those sacrifices. But when every act of love becomes a debt, the relationship changes. The child begins feeling obligated rather than loved. Love really giving creates gratitude. Love presented as a bill creates pressure. Friendships suffer from this as well. One friend always remembers who called first. Who paid last? Who initiated plans? Who helped more? Who texted more? Who sacrificed more? Eventually, the friendship becomes exhausting because every interaction is being measured. This is why transactional dating creates problems. A man pays for dinner. Now he feels entitled to something. I spent $50 on you. I spent $100 on you. Now I expect to be paid in kind. A woman accepts the dinner. Now she feels pressured. The moment generosity becomes a transaction, the atmosphere changes. Now nobody is enjoying the experience. Everyone is calculating. Now imagine a different household. The husband helps because he wants to help. The wife helps because she wants to help. The children contribute because contribution is part of the culture. Nobody is carrying a calculator. Nobody is keeping a spreadsheet. Nobody is waiting to announce their sacrifices. People simply care about one another. Can you imagine how peaceful that would be? Not because everyone contributes equally every day. Some days, one person carries more. Some days, another person carries more. Life isn't always balanced, but over time, generosity balances itself. One of the stranger things about love is that it grows when freely given. The moment love becomes a contract, something begins dying. Not responsibility, not accountability. Those remain important. But genuine love cannot flourish where every interaction is reduced to a transaction. One of the greatest reasons Paul emphasizes grace is because grace interrupts scorekeeping. Grace allows people to be human. Grace allows room for imperfection. Grace allows relationships to breathe because no marriage survives without grace. No family survives without grace. No friendship survives without grace. No community survives without grace. And that is why Paul continually points us back to love. Because love is not an accounting system. Love is not a competition. Love is not a transaction. Love is the decision to seek the flourishing of another person, even when keeping score would be easier. And when people stop asking, what do I owe? What am I owed? And start asking, how can I help? Relationships begin transforming. Next, let's talk about another relationship killer. The need to be right. One of the most difficult things for human beings to do is admit, maybe I'm wrong. Or even harder, maybe I'm partly wrong. Have you ever argued with someone and halfway through the conversation realized they were right? But instead of admitting it, you continued arguing anyway. Not because you believed your position, because you had already invested too much into being right. At that point, you are no longer defending truth. You are defending your ego. The original issue left the conversation 30 minutes ago. Now it's just pride fighting for survival. Imagine a husband and wife driving somewhere. The husband takes a wrong turn. The wife gently says, I think we're supposed to turn back there. Now there are two possible outcomes. Outcome one, you are right. Let's turn around. Simple, easy, peaceful. Outcome two, the husband sadly transforms into a defense attorney. He begins explaining traffic patterns. Anything except you are right. 30 minutes later, they are lost. Not because they didn't know the direction, because pride was driving. Let's be fair, women do it too. A husband points out something respectfully. Instead of considering it, the response becomes, well, what about the time you? Suddenly, a new argument appears. Then another. Then another. Now nobody remembers the original issue. The conversation has become a scavenger hunt through past mistakes. One thing Paul understood is that knowledge alone doesn't transform people. Love transforms people. This is why Paul says, knowledge puffeth up, but charity edifieth. Think about that. Knowledge can inflate the ego. Knowledge can make people arrogant. Knowledge can make people difficult. We've all met people who know a lot and somehow make everyone around them miserable. Because information without humility becomes pride. Social media has made this worse. Everyone is debating. Everyone is correcting. Everyone is proving. Everyone is defending. People aren't listening anymore. They are preparing responses. Some people don't read to understand. They read to disagree. The entire conversation becomes, how quickly can I prove someone wrong? Rather than, what can I learn? Parents often do this too. A child expresses a feeling. Instead of listening, the parent immediately begins explaining why the child shouldn't feel that way. Now let's pause. The feeling already exists. Explaining why someone shouldn't feel it doesn't make it disappear. Understanding creates connection. Dismissal creates distance. A wiser response might be, help me understand why you feel that way. Notice the difference. One response shuts down the conversation. The other opens it. Imagine a household where people aren't obsessed with being right. The husband listens. The wife listens. The children listen. People can disagree without becoming enemies. People can change their minds without feeling ashamed. People can say, "That's a good point." Can you imagine how much conflict would disappear? Not because everyone always agrees, because everyone values understanding more than victory. The cost of being right. Here's something interesting. Sometimes people win arguments and lose relationships. They prove their point. They establish their correctness. They demonstrate their superiority. And then wonder why nobody enjoys being around them. Because human beings need more than correctness. They need connection. A relationship where one person is always right and everyone else is always wrong becomes exhausting. The humility test. One of the simplest tests of humility is this: can you change your mind when presented with better information? Not because you are weak, because you are teachable. A humble person isn't threatened by learning. A humble person isn't threatened by growth. A humble person isn't threatened by being corrected. Why? Because their identity is not built on being right all the time. Jesus and questions. Something interesting about Jesus: he often responded to questions with questions. Why? Because transformation is deeper than information. Sometimes helping people think is more powerful than winning an argument. Many people are trying to win debates. Few people are helping others grow. If Christ is in all, then every person potentially has something to teach us, even children, even people we disagree with, even people from different backgrounds, even people with different experiences. That doesn't mean everyone is correct. It means wisdom remains open to learning, and learning requires humility. Next, let's talk about something so common that many people overlook its power. Words. Simple words. Ordinary words. Words we speak every day. Words we hear every day. Words we remember for decades. It's amazing when you think about it. A sentence can change the direction of a person's life. One encouraging word can give someone the courage to keep going. One destructive word can stay with someone for 20 years. And Paul understood this better than most people realize. Again and again, Paul tells believers to build one another up, to encourage one another, to edify one another. Because Paul understood something profound. People often become what they repeatedly hear. Have you ever noticed how easy it is for people to criticize? A person can do 99 things right, and somebody will focus on the one thing they did wrong. A child gets 5 A's and 1 B. Suddenly, the family launches a national investigation. The child is thinking, did nobody see the other 5 grades? Apparently not. The B has become the headline. The A's are supporting actors. Imagine a husband working hard, trying his best, making mistakes, learning, growing like every human being. Now imagine every conversation sounds like this. You forgot this. You didn't do that. You should have done better. Why can't you be more like? Over time, something happens. The man's spirit begins shrinking. Not because he's weak, because constant criticism exhausts people. Now imagine the opposite. His wife says, I appreciate you. Thank you for everything you do. I know you are trying. I'm proud of your growth. Notice something. The problems haven't magically disappeared, but encouragement creates energy. Criticism often drains it. The same thing applies to women. A woman spends hours caring for her family, managing responsibilities, solving problems, supporting others, and nobody notices. Nobody acknowledges it. Nobody says thank you. Eventually, she begins feeling invisible. Now imagine a husband who says, I appreciate everything you do. Those words cost nothing, yet they can mean everything. This becomes even more important with children. Many adults are still living from words spoken decades ago. A teacher said, you are smart, and they believed it. A parent said, you will never amount to anything, and they carried it for years. Words become seeds. The question is, what are we planting? Imagine 2 parents. The first constantly criticizes. The second corrects, but also encourages. The first child grows up, constantly trying to prove their worth. The second child grows up, knowing they have worth. Both parents may love their children, but their words create very different environments. Paul's secret. One thing Paul constantly does in his letters is encourage people, even when correcting them. Think about that. Paul addresses mistakes, but he also reminds people of their potential, their value, their growth, their identity. He understood that people grow best when they believe growth is possible. Workplace example. Everyone has worked for 2 kinds of managers. The first manager only notices mistakes. If you do 10 things right and 1 thing wrong, guess which one gets discussed? The second manager notices growth. They still correct mistakes, but they also acknowledge effort. Guess which manager inspires people to perform better. The one who constantly tears people down, or the one who helps people believe in themselves? The answer is obvious. Imagine a household where encouragement becomes normal. The husband encourages the wife. The wife encourages the husband. The parents encourage the children. The children encourage one another. People celebrate growth. People acknowledge effort. People notice progress. Can you imagine what that does to the atmosphere? People start flourishing. People start believing in themselves. People start taking healthy risks. People start becoming the best version of themselves. This connects to our earlier lesson on generosity, because encouragement is a form of generosity. It costs nothing, yet it can change everything. A compliment, a thank you, a kind word, a moment of recognition. These things are often more valuable than people realize. Now, let's be honest. Some people have developed a habit of only speaking when something is wrong. The only feedback people receive is negative. The only attention people receive is correction. The only conversations people receive are complaints. Eventually, everyone around them becomes emotionally exhausted. Not because they are evil, because they have forgotten the power of encouragement. If Christ is in all, then every person carries potential. Every person carries value. Every person carries possibility. Encouragement recognizes that. Encouragement says, I see something beautiful in you. I see growth in you. I see potential in you. And sometimes people need someone else to see it before they can see it themselves. Many people assume great relationships are built on grand gestures. Often, they are built on daily encouragement, small words, small moments, small reminders, repeated consistently over time, like water nourishing a plant. The growth may seem slow, but eventually the results become obvious. One of the greatest gifts we can give another human being is encouragement. Not flattery, not manipulation, genuine encouragement. The ability to help someone see the best within themselves, to remind them of their value, to remind them of their growth, to remind them of their potential. Because words can build people, words can strengthen people, words can heal people, and unfortunately, words can also wound people. Paul understood this. That is why he continually urged believers to edify one another, to build one another up, to strengthen one another, to encourage one another. Because households flourish where encouragement becomes normal. Marriages flourish where encouragement becomes normal. Children flourish where encouragement becomes normal. Communities flourish where encouragement becomes normal. And if Christ is in all, then perhaps one of the highest uses of our words is helping others become who they were always capable of becoming. Have you ever noticed how some people treat strangers better than family? They will smile at strangers, thank strangers, hold doors for strangers, speak kindly to strangers, then come home and act like everyone owes them something. It's one of the strange one of the stranger things hold on. It's one of the stranger things humans do. Sometimes the people closest to us receive the least kindness. And Paul is constantly correcting this because the people closest to us often need our best qualities the most. Imagine a household where mutual honor becomes the culture. The husband wakes up thinking, how can I make my wife's day easier? The wife wakes up thinking, how can I encourage my husband today? The children are learning, how can I contribute to the family? Nobody is asking, what am I owed? Everybody is asking, how can I help? Can you imagine such a household? The husband comes home with pizza. The wife surprises everyone with dessert. The children help without being forced. People spend time together. People laugh together. People solve problems together. People celebrate together. The household becomes a place of restoration rather than stress. Now let's be realistic. Mutual honor doesn't mean nobody disagrees. Healthy families disagree. Healthy marriages disagree. Healthy friendships disagree. The difference is how they disagree. In unhealthy households, people attack each other. In healthy households, people address the issue. In unhealthy households, the goal is victory. In healthy households, the goal is understanding. In unhealthy households, someone must lose. In healthy households, everyone seeks a solution. Imagine a husband and wife facing financial difficulty. One approach is blame. This is your fault. You should have done better. You always. The other approach is partnership. We are going to figure this out. Let's work together. We are on the same team. The problem remains the same, but the atmosphere changes completely. One creates distance, the other creates unity. Parenting example. Imagine a child makes a mistake. One parent humiliates, another parent teaches. One creates fear, the other creates growth. The mistake becomes an opportunity rather than a weapon. And the child learns something powerful. I can fail and still be loved. That lesson changes lives. Dating example. Even dating changes when mutual honor becomes the foundation. Instead of asking, What can I get from this person? People begin asking, who is this person? Instead of evaluating bank accounts, restaurants, gifts, and appearances, they begin evaluating character, integrity, kindness, humility, generosity, consistency, the things that actually sustain relationships. The same principle works at work. Imagine a team where everyone is competing for credit. Now imagine a team where everyone is trying to help one another succeed. Which team flourishes? The answer is obvious. Human beings thrive when Anna becomes normal. What Paul was really building. Sometimes people read Paul's letters as though he were merely creating religious communities. But I think he was doing something much deeper. Paul was trying to create environments where human beings could flourish. Communities where generosity was normal, humility was normal, kindness was normal, encouragement was normal, forgiveness was normal. Because when those things become normal, relationships become healthier, families become healthier, societies become healthier. The secret most people miss. The secret is this: Anna multiplies. When people feel respected, they often become more respectful. When people feel appreciated, they often become more appreciative. When people receive kindness, they often become kinder. The atmosphere begins reinforcing itself. And before long, an entire household changes. Not because one person became perfect, because everyone began contributing. If Christ is in all, then every interaction becomes sacred. Every conversation, every disagreement, every act of kindness, every opportunity to encourage, every opportunity to forgive, every opportunity to serve, because every person becomes someone to honor rather than someone to use. And that changes everything. The deep lesson: most people spend their lives searching for the perfect relationship, the perfect spouse, the perfect family, the perfect environment. But perhaps the greater question is, am I contributing to the kind of environment I wish existed? Because households are built one interaction at a time, one conversation at a time, one act of kindness at a time, one act of generosity at a time, one moment of humility at a time. Paul's vision was never merely about religious belief. It was about human flourishing. It was about creating households where people felt safe, where people felt valued, where people felt heard, where people felt encouraged, where people felt loved. Because when mutual honor becomes the culture, people stop merely existing together. They begin flourishing together. And that is one of the clearest expressions of Christ consciousness in everyday life. Not domination, not control, not superiority, but love expressed through honor. love expressed through humility, love expressed through generosity, love expressed through service. And when that becomes the culture of a household, something beautiful begins to happen. People grow, people heal, people thrive together. We've reached the end of the teaching. Everything we've explored can be summarized in one simple question. If Christ is in all, if the source is in all of us, how should we treat one another? If we generally reflected on that question every day, much of what Paul spent his letters teaching would naturally begin appearing in our lives, because the Christ way is not the way of domination. It is the way of mutual flourishing, and that changes everything. Thanks for being here, and I will see you in the next teaching.